Okay, today is the 15th of December. Um, I'm going to do a little Bible study in regards to the Nephilim. So this is going to be the second part of my Christian perspective on Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Sabe, whoever you want to call them. And I'm going to try to make this short as possible, be as informative as possible without going into some lengthy dialogue, but I'm going to go through some, quickly go through some passages in the Old and New Testament and try to give you a little historical thing with this. This is all the rage at this particular point in the cryptid field. Everybody's trying to figure out what these beings are. So the first time I talked about it was had to do with the demonic realm, right? So this is going to be the second part. I'm going to do a couple of these, and I'm going to kind of go in progression of where things are. But okay, so here is the verse that everybody uses. They use chapter 6 of Genesis, the beginning of it, okay? Now, historically, this is supposedly written by Moses. That's what tradition says. That's what historically is kind of agreed upon. There could be some disagreement there, but typically it's believed that Moses wrote this. So it's the first chapter, 6. It's chapter 6, the first verse of chapter 6 in Genesis. And it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of the men were fair, and they took with them wives of all of which they chose. Okay. And there's another part that says, and these were the mighty men, and so on and so forth, men of renown. So it goes on to that. Let me give you a little background on this. So I'm going to read to you what my concordance says in replies to this. Okay. So, and it came to pass that when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them. And it's referring to the events of this chapter probably began about the time of Enoch, which was about 1,000 years before the flood. There were no doubt several million people on the face of the earth, and at that time, verse 1 is not meant to imply that the births of baby girls were more than that of baby boys, but rather meant to set up a narrative from which what is about to be said. So when it says that the sons of God took the daughters of men that were fair, and they chose and took wives of them all. The sons of God portrayed here refer to, so quote unquote, angels that left their first estate, which had thrown in their lot with Lucifer, according to what they're saying there, who led the revolution against God sometime in eternity past. Remember that, eternity past. In order to spoil the human lineage through which the Messiah would ultimately come. They would seek to corrupt the lineage and do so by marrying the daughters of men, thereby producing a mongrel race, so to speak, of which at least some of these offspring turned out to be giants. At any rate, all who were the result of such a union were tainted. The term sons of God in the Old Testament, at least is used here, is never used of human beings, but always used of angels, whether righteous or fallen, regardless. Job 1:6 and Job 2:1. In the short epistle, Jude mentions these particular angels. He said they were kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. He then said that what their sin was, going after strange flesh. When the Bible talks about strange flesh, it's talking about non-human flesh. Concerning this, Jude also said that God had reserved them in everlasting chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. So what this particular passage is taking from is from basically the book of Enoch. I would suggest you read it. There's a couple different versions of it. I would prefer the translation from the Ethiopian text because that's probably the best. Okay, so there is two sets of thinking when it comes to the Nephilim. There is a theological. There are some theologians that think that the sons of God is a reference to the godly lineage of Seth, the replacement for Abel after Cain was murdered. right? These group of theologians don't subscribe to the quote-unquote angel theory, because they want to go back to what something Jesus says, that marriage is not something for angels, but it's a human thing. But as I just read, the only time that text is used the same in the language it was used, the sons of God, is used in the book of Job, where it says the sons of God are presenting themselves before the Lord in the heavenly realm, and Lucifer is among them. So it's basically talking about angels, and that's what that's talking about here. So in a historical context, you had these angels who were not originally part of the rebellion of Satan, but come afterward, because the creation of man happens after the rebellion of Satan. Okay? So you have angels that left their first estate, meaning they left their, not just their mode of habitation, where they lived, estate, like you live on an estate, right? But they left their not just their heavenly realm, but they gave up their heavenly bodies, their angelic body, for a more carnal body. And if you read through Scripture, there is at least one group of angels that seem to appear to be that can take human form. In the story of Lot is a good example. In Daniel, in the book of Daniel, too, yours seems to be a group of angels, and in the book of Daniel, he calls them watcher angels, which is important in the book of Enoch. Okay, now Enoch never made it into our modern day Bible for various reasons, basically because they couldn't get its authenticity down. But when it comes down to it, we should be, if you're a Bible believer, you should be aware of the writings and the things that the Old Testament people and the New Testament people read or were aware of. Okay, so when it goes to the book of Jude, it says there in the book of Jude, they kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation. Okay, and if you read through this, it says that the judgment of the Enochian angels was chains until judgment day. Satan and Lucifer doesn't have that judgment on him yet. He's not chained and he's not bound by chains. And the fallen angels that came with him are not bound by chains. That's an important distinction. So whatever angels partook in this genetic mixing with human beings that anticipated the flood, those angels that were held in contempt of that have been chained until judgment day, which is an interesting thought. Why are they chained waiting for judgment, and then the Luciferian ones are not? That's an interesting question I have no answer to. So that term Nephilum is translated two ways. It can be translated to English, and it can also be translated to fallen ones. Remember, this was done in Hebrew originally. And it gets translated in English into giants. And these beings, this pretty much explains ancient mythology of almost every culture on the planet, of Hercules-type individuals, demigods, human beings that are part god and part human, like Hercules and Perseus. If you read Greek mythology, you have the gods intermingling with human beings and producing demigods, half human, half offspring, and human offspring, half godlike offspring. And in the ancient world, fallen angels would have presented themselves. They would have been seen as gods, right? Now, I recommend reading the book Enoch. It goes into a lot more detail. You take it as gospel. I would just read it for the sake of reading, sake, to make yourself aware of the context of what we're talking about here in the particular scriptures. So I think that's kind of important. The other thing is, in this translation, there is the way the word could be used is when men multiplied on the earth, right? The translation can also work whenever angels commingle with human beings, you're going to produce Nephilum. So there is a theory that after the flood, there was a second incursion of angelic beings onto the earth and produced lesser Nephilim beings. Hence, when Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt and get to the promised land, they come, and it's in the, read the scriptures, do the search for it. They come back and say, oh, we can't go there. The Nephilim are there. The sons of Anak are there. We are grasshoppers in their sight. Now, when they're talking about grasshoppers, they're talking about the desert locust. They're talking about an insect that's about this big. Is it literal, or are they being over exaggerating? We're literally grasshoppers in their sight, and us in their eyes too. That would mean they're 30, 40 feet tall. I personally don't subscribe to that. I think they came back to the way that they sent the 12 spies in, right? 10 of them are terrified, and I think they are exaggerating the size of the giants of the so-called Nephilim and the sons of Anak in the promised land. They're over exaggerating. So what you have is you have giants in the promised land, right? In the ancient land of Israel before they go in there. And scripture talks about this. Caleb wants to go take the land. Once Joshua gains control, Caleb wants to take the land, that the giants, stronghold of the giants up in the mountains. Right? The Philistines were using Goliath as a mercenary. Goliath had 3 brothers. And I can go into the king of Bashan, and Bashan was would be like modern day Syria at this point, who was supposedly like 13 feet tall. Were these guys hideous and grotesque looking and blah, blah, blah? No, they're not. They're different. They're definitely different from the Nephilim of the pre-flood. Then we have another group of giants called the Nephilum, and we have, which the sons of Anak would be. Now, Anak is a descendant of one of Noah's grandsons. I think it's Canaan, and these were all let's make it real simple. By the time Israel goes into the promised land, there are tribes of giants there. The Amorites are considered giants, right? Up in Bashan, there are giants. There's giants all over the place there. Now, how big are they? My guess is they're probably about anywhere from 8 to 13 feet tall. This isn't a big shocker to these people. But they were involved in the pagan rituals and the pagan religion, pagan sacrifices of what was going on in the land, and that's why God... The reason Israel languished in Egypt for 400 years was because God says the cup of the Amorites isn't full yet, meaning God's wrath, he's waiting. He's trying to give them time to repent. That's what that means. Now, here's the interesting part. In that part of the world, you had a kingdom called Edom. And Edom, the Edomites were the descendants of Esau, the brother of Jacob, which we'll cover next. We'll go over into that section next time. Okay, so what I'm trying to make clear is that even in the New Testament, you have the book of Jude that mentions that, and in the book of Peter, 2 Peter, it said women should cover their heads lest they tempt the angels. Where's that a reference to? It's a reference to the book of Enoch. He's talking about whenever the sons of God commingle with human beings, you end up with these hybrid beings. As crazy as that seems, I tend to lean towards this theory. Okay, I can go into a little more detail about this when I talk about Esau. The story of Esau is really important, and like I said, down in the part of Israel, in the southern part of the kingdom, when they were coming in, that was the land of Edom. That was the Edomites. That's where the descendants of Jacob's brother Esau, the hairy man. Right on the other side of that, you had the Amorites and Amalekites, and they were both considered giants. And one of the sins of Esau, one of the things that his parents weren't happy about, was he took Canaanite wives. So he took wives not of his bloodline, but he took them from the giant bloodline. You have to read the text. You don't realize it because you got to study these things in depth about the people groups who were living in these areas at the time. So by the time, you got 400 years go past, you have the descendants of Esau, the hairy man, right, commingling with the giants. So I think maybe you can start to understand where I'm going here. Now, as far as the sons of Anak, Anak was considered a descendant of one of Noah's grandsons. And they were a lineage of giants as well. So part of this Nephilim theory too, part of the Nephilim theory is that one of the 3 wives of Noah's sons might have been carrying the genes of the giants from the pre-flood. But they're a lesser degree than the pre-Nephilim flood. I know how genetics work on the level of most living creatures on planet Earth. There's nuances to every living creature, dominant recessive, partial recessive traits, and so on and so forth. It's different with different animals and creatures, right? I don't know how this works with a being of a higher dimension than ours. Okay, but if the book of Enoch speaks correctly, it was that first generation of what came out of that union with the sons of God and the daughters of men was horrific, basically. And in the book of Enoch, it speaks that all flesh was corrupted. All flesh was corrupted, meaning all the animals were corrupted, all the fish were corrupted, meaning these angelic beings somehow or another wanted to commingle their genes, these higher beings, wanted to commingle their genes with not just humans, but they eventually got to the point where they started to see what they could do with other living creatures and see what will come of it. And I think that's where our legends of minotaurs and mermaids and centaurs and satyrs come from. In Greek mythology, you have the person that's half horse and half person. But truth be told, it probably didn't look like that. It's just like when you hybridize something, you kind of get characteristics of both beings. Take a mule, for instance, but that's within a family. Horse and donkey, within the same family group, they have characteristics of both horse and donkey. Now, what happens if you intermingle this angelic genetic, whatever, higher code versus with something like a fish? I don't know. It might have been something more human-like than Greek mythology. Do you understand what I'm saying? I want your wheels to spin. I want your wheels to turn. And I want people to go into the Bible and dig these things up because they're there. There's little nuggets. But you have to, and the great thing with having access to Google at this point, you can access all, and YouTube, particularly YouTube, you can find out all kinds of stuff from it. Now, do we know all this stuff for sure? No. Does the evidence, as a Christian, as a believer in a Bible, does the evidence seem to point in a direction of hybrid humans? Yes. Is there scientific human evidence of hybrid humans? Yes. Anybody watching this, if you're of European descent, particularly Northern Europeans, you are a hybrid of at least one other species of human being, which would be Neanderthal. The Neanderthal gene is not the same as Homo sapiens gene. They have a different genome, but there is scientific proof, scientific evidence. We have found fossil remains, not bone remains you can get DNA out of hybrid human being, hybrid Neanderthal humans. And anybody of European descent has a percentage of Neanderthal genes in it. They say that's where the red hair gene comes from. Now, does that mean they were lesser humans? I don't believe so. Does it mean they weren't human? I don't believe so. And then if you want to get more crazy, we have the Sovians, I believe that's how it's pronounced, the Sovians over in China or Russia in the East. Completely different genome than modern humans, than you and I, which means they were a separate species. But they weren't separate enough that we couldn't commingle and produce fertile offspring. See, that's the rub. Where do you want to draw the line on what it means to be human? When you are a result of hybridization of other quote unquote humans. Where, and I think there's another one. There's another called, I think they're called the red deer people. They found some remains of these people, and they've gotten their DNA sequence, and they seem to be everybody was existing at the same time. And basically, what I'm basically trying to say here is, you at least 10,000 years ago have at least three distinct human species with three distinct, completely different genomes, but intermingling and interchangeable. And I'll leave you with this thought. If this sounds crazy to you, I'm going to leave you with an example of this. Probably the easiest example I can give you. You are aware of llamas, right? There's another animal called an alpaca. They look very similar. Well, in case you didn't know, that is a hybrid. It's a combination of a vicuna, which is a camelid from South America, and a llama. It is a hybrid that can reproduce and produce fertile offspring. It looks different, but it's still a hybrid. I'll give you another example. All the macaws, the big parrots, the big colorful parrots with long tails out of South America, you can crossbreed every single species of those together, and they produce fertile offspring. There's blue and gold macaws, scarlet macaws, green-winged macaws, military macaws. These are just the big ones. You can crossbreed all of those species, every single one of them, to each other. Get these crazy color combinations, and they're all fertile. They can reproduce without any infertility. They're all separate species with separate genomes. Okay? There's the blue and gold is separate from the scarlet, but you can cross them together and you get what's called a Catalina. Different color, easily recognizable, and you could keep crossing all these species together, but they're separate species, but they still can reproduce. And that's what I'm saying about us as human beings. We, at one time, were like the macaws, or we're like the alpaca, or we're the result. We're like an alpaca. So I'm just leaving that out there. I want you to consider these things. I want you to dive deep in your Bible, look a little bit harder. Next time, when I go into this Nephilum thing, I'm going to try to draw into the story of Jacob and Esau. Try to pull some stuff together. I hope this was informative to some of you that are looking for answers, and I wish I could have dived a little more deeper into it, but for brevity's sake, I'm keeping it at 23 minutes because I know people's attention span is not the greatest, and I hope it is. I hope it's made you want to dig a little deeper. But the big thing I want you to take from this too, you have a Luciferian fall, and you have a pre-flood fall of angels. Two separate fallings, okay, two different ends. One group is chained, waiting for judgment. The other one is judged, but isn't chained. Okay, the Luciferian rebellion, they still have sway and influence and power over the world. The ones that are chained don't. See, there's a big difference. And the also thing is they left, the second incursion was they left their first estate. You don't have that with Satan's original rebellion. So even though you have rebellious angels, you cannot call them both even though I read this text and it joined Lucifer's lot, it did join Lucifer's lot in a sense of rebellion, in a sense. You had a rebellion, but they're two separate and are apart. They're not. I don't think they're connected to each other. And I don't think that second group's intention was to pollute the bloodline. Were they being influenced by the satanic side? It's possible, but it doesn't say that. It seems these guys had their own agenda. I think their own agenda was they looked down, saw the daughters of men that were fair, but I think that what it was is they saw the ability of human beings to reproduce, and they wanted that because they don't have that. They wanted the idea of having family and offspring. And the only way they were going to be able to do that was to leave their first estate. So I will leave you with those thoughts. Check out the scriptures. Leave any comments that you think, what you have on this. Till next time.